Wow. Hey, much love and respect. Pura vida, mi gente. Thanks for tuning in once again. Appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. We're just going to continue. This is part two, the out of Olmec theory. We're going to keep reading. Just remember what we read before. The name Olmec is a misnomer when you're talking about the ancient people of Mexico. They did not call themselves the Olmec. There is a historical Olmec tribe that came in to this area much more recently. It was in 1150. This was an invading barbaric tribe. Their name was used on the ancient people of Mexico. Did not go extinct. This culture had much influence on the Maya and many southeastern tribes of the US. So let's just continue learning about the Olmec. We got some more information today. Again, this is part two. If you haven't watched part one, make sure to check that out before you watch this one. So once again, thanks for being here. Hope you guys enjoy. Let's start reading. We return to the book, The Olmec, Mother Culture of Mesoamerica by Roman Pina Chan. And we go to chapter 3. It says here, a hypothesis about the origin of the Olmecs. The hypothesis regarding the origin of the Olmecs posed to the stylistic typological evolution of Mesoamerican ceramics. All right, it's in the art. Remember, all they have of the Olmec is their art. And the development of the South American pottery tradition. Okay, so here's a link to South America. We're talking about possible origin to the Olmec. As everyone knows, terracotta, this labyrinth Cinderella of archaeology, constitutes in all its components, such as the mixture, the degreasing, the slip, the firing, the shape, the decoration, etc., the most sensitive diagnostic element to cultural changes. Therefore, the reader will understand very well why Pina Chan stops at the detailed description of each of the pottery phases that he analyzes. Pottery production began in the agricultural villages of Mexico around the year 2500 BC, with the appearance of a coarse, brown-colored, undecorated ceramic that has a series of cracks or holes on its surface, pock-marked pottery. This first pottery tradition corresponded to the Puron, Puerto Marquez phase, developed between 2500 and 1700 BC, between the Pacific coast of Guerrero and the central Altiplano, Puebla. Around 1700 BC, ceramics suddenly appeared, which was distinguished by the great variety of shapes, types, decorative and coloring techniques, and by the abundant production of terracotta figurines, especially female ones. This tradition spread from 1700 to 1300 BC, mainly in the regions of Chiapas and the Gulf Coast, central and northern Veracruz, western Mexico, and the Pacific coast of Guatemala. All right, so, paying attention to the dates they're given here. Remember, they telling us that the Olmec started 1200 BC. So all this is going on before the so-called Olmec started. All this art, all this trade, polished jade, all this stuff, figurines. Both the appearance of ceramics in Mesoamerica and the successive and unforeseen presence of new technical and stylistic elements seem to be related to the evolution of South American ceramics. It's related even to the ceramics in South America, particularly that of Ecuador and Colombia. In fact, it is precisely in the area of the so-called Ecuadorian Colombian pottery tradition from 4000 to 1500 BC, where not only the oldest ceramics, vessels, and figurines known to date in America are observed, all right, but also the first ceramic groups that they experiment and perfect new styles and techniques and forms. This pottery shows elements similar to those of the Mesoamerican ceramic tradition. So we can theorize, we can theorize that the second has been influenced by the first. Meaning the Mesoamerican culture, ceramic tradition, this art, these little figurines and all that, was influenced from South America. This is what the author's saying. It seems because they have the exact same figurines, but it's much older there. So again, we can theorize that the second has been influenced by the first, not only in terms of its appearance, but also in terms of its successive development. All right? Could this be a possible origin to some of the so-called Olmec culture and civilization? People coming up from South America and mixing with people that are already in this region of Anahuac. You know, this is ancient land too. So here are some examples. All right, they're giving you. And it says terracotta figurines from Valdivia with partial hair shaven by Pina Chan. So theorizing that the South American ceramic culture might have influenced some of the Mesoamerican. It says if this is true, the Mesoamerican lower pre-classic period, 2500 to 1300 BC, would then constitute a dynamic era during which new southern influences, the Ecuadorian Colombian tradition, would have been introduced into the substrate of the Purón, Puerto Marquez pottery. All right? They're introducing this to Mesoamerica, possibly due to human migratory movements, migrations. This integration process would have perhaps led to the creation of regional and local pottery styles with their own characteristics, allowing some groups of the agricultural population to evolve, giving rise to more complex and differentiated societies. Human migration, bringing all these different cultural styles, influences, could lead, as they're saying here, to the development of pottery styles with their own characteristics and allowing some populations to evolve, right? Giving rise to different societies. This situation allows us to formulate a hypothesis about the origin of the ancient so-called Olmecs, all right? Now remember, everybody's always trying to put the Olmecs somewhere else. And why not? Why wouldn't there be some influence from South America? There's so many ancient cultures down there. You don't think they would have worked their way up eventually at some point, or vice versa, and had trade since ancient times, or established a connection again? According to the archaeological evidence that we have with the established dates and basing them fundamentally on ceramics and figurines, we can hypothetically establish that there were four periods in the origin and development of the ancient Olmecs. Formation period, 1700 to 1300 BC. Integration period, 1300 to 900 BC. Expansion period, 900 to 300 BC. Period of disintegration, 300 BC to 200 AD. It can be said that the first two periods correspond to the Olmec culture of the village, and the last two to the theocratic Olmec culture, right, much later. The four periods of Olmec evolution are briefly described below, based on the results of the archaeological excavation. So this is what they're saying based on what they're finding, all right? So the formation period is the first one. Remember, that's 1700 to 1300 BC, according to their carbon dating, right? We got to touch the hijack with this always, having an open mind. But what they're trying to say, one of the oldest phases, it can be assumed that the penetration and diffusion in Mesoamerica of a new pottery tradition, characterized by its rich decoration, together with some cultural features from the coast of South America, favored the formation of the Olmec style in culture. So not just the art, but the culture. What? Hey, they're letting you know here. It seems that there was some influence from South America that favored again the formation of the Olmec culture. Straight up. Therefore, around 1500s, this new current began to spread throughout the Mexican territory. A branch was introduced into the territory of the current state of Oaxaca. Okay, a branch. Again, they're letting you know this began to spread when around 1500 BC, some influence from South America began to spread in Mexican territory, and a branch in the Oaxaca, later penetrating into Guerrero and the central Altiplano, thus giving rise to what would be the two great focuses or poles of attraction of the Olmec culture. All right, guys? So it seems there was an influence from South America in these main locations where the Olmec started. And the art, the terracotta, the ceramics, part of the culture kind of shows that. And they know that over there was much older. So it had to have been first integration period. This is a whole other phase, right after the formation period. The two poles of Olmec culture are activated and integrated. All right, so all these little branches are starting to unite, also encompassing self-sufficient agricultural villages. The pottery production of the inhabitants of the Oaxaca, Guerrero, central Altiplano axis, richer and more elaborate compared to the ceramics of the Gulf Coast, suggests that the former achieved a higher cultural development in this period. Exchanges of raw material and finished products are also intensifying between the two areas. And then we go on to the expansion period, right? The next phase. The center of the Olmec culture and society moved from approximately 1000 to 900 BC towards the Gulf Coast area. The increase in population and the proliferation of new villages located at strategic points for trade, as well as the consequent growth of relationships and exchanges, allowed the birth of the first ceremonial centers. All right, the birth of what? The first ceremonial centers planned and controlled by a priestly caste theocracy. We got this in the last part. Religion becomes more complex, while new achievements are achieved in the field of architecture, sculpture, and intellectual development. The diffusion and influence of the Olmec culture expands over a vast territory between central northern Mexico and northwestern Costa Rica. Okay, yes, Costa Rica, Pura Vida land, my land. Yeah, there's a lot of Olmec so-called influence over here. A lot, guys. But remember what they were just saying about the influence to South America. There's only one way you can go if you're going by land, right? From South America to Mexico, you have to go through Costa Rica or Central America, right? And that's what they're about to kind of show you right here in this image. You see the arrows. Now, up here is Mexico, right? Yucatan and Guatemala and all that. And down here is Costa Rica, down after this lake. That's Nicaragua Lake. Right here is Costa Rica. They're showing you the arrows going up. He's letting you know people going up, influencing this area, this region of Mexico, helping to create this so-called Olmec culture. We're going to start seeing a lot of similarities now, especially when it comes to the Jaguar, right? So this is the next image. So once in Mexican territory, this is what they were talking about. The integration, expansion periods, all right, after the formation periods. So all these settling, the influence again coming from South America. So a lot of these people passed through all these like Central American countries, possibly encountering other peoples there that were local, coming together, creating all these different societies, eventually reaching Mexico. That's where you get this big civilization. To me, the Olmec so-called civilization was like a huge metropolis in these ancient times. Now it goes on to talk about the period of disintegration. From approximately 300 BC, the Olmec culture declines and disintegrates, although it continues to survive in some nuclei that still preserve the ancient splendor. At the same time, in some regions, certain local styles were formed based on the cultural heritage of the theocratic Olmecs, which ultimately contributed during the Classic period, 100-900 AD, to the integration of some of the high cultures of theocratic civilizations of Mesoamerica. Next, the Olmec culture of the village and the theocratic Olmec culture are analyzed based on archaeological evidence.
The Olmecs were a pre-Columbian civilization centered in south-central Mexico in what is now Veracruz and Tabasco. We now know that they were in that area since 2500 BC and flourished there between 1400 and 400 BC. For reasons unknown to historians, the Olmec population dropped precipitously between 400 and 350 BC. Their art ceased, and they became unknown to history until a colossal Olmec head was discovered in the mid-19th century. This head and others were assumed to be of late Mayan origin until the mid-20th century, when radiocarbon dating showed the Olmec culture to be the ancient mother culture of Mesoamerica. What you are now seeing is the largest exhibit of Olmec art ever assembled in North America.
Right, so now we return to this book. It's called The Mystery of the Olmecs by David Hatcher Childress. And we pick up where we left off last time, and it says here, who were the Olmecs? Bernal continued to study the Olmecs and came out with the only significant study on this early Central American culture in his 1969 book, The Olmec World. In that book, Bernal discussed the curious finds attributed to the Olmecs all over southern Mexico and Central America, as far south as the site of Guanacaste in Nicaragua. All right, guys, actually, Guanacaste is in Costa Rica. Let me show you. So as you guys can see here, Guanacaste province is a province of Costa Rica located in the northwestern region of the country along the coast of the Pacific Ocean. It is bordered by Nicaragua to the north. All right, that's why they're saying Nicaragua, because it's very close. But it's actually right here, as you guys can see where the red is in the map. And this yellow part, this is all of Costa Rica. So this red part right here, Guanacaste, and that's where the Chorotega nation that came down from Mesoamerica, part of my lineage, that's where they lived in Costa Rica. So it makes sense that the so-called Olmec culture was in that part of Costa Rica. So again, if they were coming from South America, remember, they would have to go through Panama, up through Costa Rica, through Nicaragua, and all the way up, you know, passing Guatemala, Honduras, and all that, Salvador, reaching Mexico. So again, the Olmecs reached all the way to Guanacaste in Costa Rica. However, he could not figure out the origin of these strange and distinctive people. He cannot figure out the origin, right? But we just read from the other book that based on the art, the ceramics, the terracotta, it seems they had a lot of influence from South America. So maybe it's not that the Olmec expanded all the way down to Costa Rica. Maybe they were just going to see their own people that had stayed behind or were already there living when they were going up, right? So he couldn't figure out the origin, though, of these distinctive people whose art featured bearded men, negroid heads, and undecipherable hieroglyphics, all right? All kinds of phenotypes, people with beard and all that, and even inscriptions. Even such famous Mayan sites as Huaxactún and El Mirador were thought by Bernal to have been previously occupied by the Olmecs. That's interesting. El Mirador, where they got La Danta Pyramid, the tallest pyramid in the world. Still, orthodox archaeologists such as the well-known British writer and archaeologist Nigel Davies maintain that the Olmec could not be the result of any transatlantic or trans-Pacific contact, says Davies, discounting the more romantic notions of an Olmec seaborne migration. Doubts persisted as to which part of Mexico was their place of origin, since they were later present in almost every region. The problem has been hotly debated. Miguel Covarrubias became convinced that the Olmec civilization first flourished in the state of Guerrero, bordering on the Pacific Ocean, but won little support for this view. Others have insisted with equal force that they originally came from highland Mexico. However, a fairly broad consensus now maintains that their heartland or home territory lay in the rubberland of southern Veracruz and Tabasco. Davis is essentially saying that the Olmecs may have originated at Monte Albán in the Oaxaca highlands. We just read that, how the influence seemed to have reached Oaxaca first, the influence from South America. And then another place, Oxtotitlan or Juxtlahuaca, near Acapulco on the Pacific, or most likely at Tres Zapotes, and La Venta in the swamps along the Gulf of Mexico. All these areas have known Olmec sites. They're like, which one is the origin? Maybe they all were influenced by people coming up, right? And then mixing with the local people there in these areas. The idea that these strange negroid heads might be the result of early African exploration seems totally alien to the historians and archaeologists. They're not African, who have taken over the archaeology of the Americas. Despite depictions of various lords, kings, travelers, magicians, and whatnot that look like Africans, Chinese, bearded Europeans, or some other strangers, most professors teaching at our major universities maintain that they are not evidence of ancient pre Columbian explorers. They admit, though, that people might erroneously get this idea from a superficial view of these various statues and carvings. All right, guys, so I hate to be repetitive and we got to dodge the hijack always and, make sure we discern what we're reading. America's a true old world. We had all these phenotypes, or what they're calling Negroid or Chinese, European. Those ain't like, that's not the way you call a phenotype. You get what I'm saying? It's almost, that's a very generalized way to put it. We had people with these phenotypes here in ancient America. Doesn't mean that they came from China, doesn't mean that they came from Africa, or that they came from Europe. So even to mainstream historians, the origin of the Olmecs is a mystery. In the realm of alternative history, many theories exist on how Negroids arrived in Central America. They were always here, been here. One theory is that they are connected with Atlantis. This is Atlantis, so you're right. As part of the warrior class of that civilization, they were tough and hard-bitten. Or perhaps they were part of an Egyptian colony in Central America. Okay, this is ancient Egypt. So again, you might be right, but you're seeing it in reverse. Or from some unknown African empire. They don't know, they're just making this up. Others have suggested that they came across the Pacific from the lost continent of Mu. Again, what is Mu? What is Mu? Remember our video? William Niven found some archaeological things 30 feet below, and then James Churchward used that archaeological find to create his book Lemuria. So where is Mu really? Continuing, and the other theory is that they're from the Shang Chinese mercenaries, which we're actually going to get into that in this series. We're going to look into that. We're going to see a lot of so-called Oriental influence. Is it really Oriental, or are we looking at it in reverse? Or was there a world trade going on already with these so-called Olmec? Who is the Western Shia and that other side of the world, huh? Similarly, there is the curious association of magicians or shamanic sorcerers using magic mushrooms and other psychedelics. To many of the Olmec statues, magicians from Africa, China, or even Atlantis. So again, dodge the hijack as we go. Remember, these books are kind of old, little outdated, and everybody's always looking from an out of Africa perspective. back in the book, The Olmec, Mother Culture of Mesoamerica by Roman Pina Chan. And we go to chapter 4. It says here, the Olmecs of the village culture period. The so-called Olmec village culture includes the periods of formation and integration, so the first two periods, as we have seen, articulate the hypothesis about the origin of the Olmecs, all right? The Southern American influence is what they're talking about. Before going on to examine what is meant by Olmec village culture, let's see once again, and in greater detail, what happens during these two cultural periods, because this way, it will be easier to understand the culture that was born from them. During the formative period, 1700 to 1300 BC, some diverse cultural traits brought by small human groups from South America penetrated Mesoamerica, okay? Again, pay attention. Some diverse cultural traits brought by small human groups from South America penetrated Mesoamerica, guys. Archaeological findings, in fact, give us indications of the infiltration. The archaeology proves it. Remember, all they got on the Olmec is the art. We got that in part 1. In many peasant villages of Mesoamerica, either of a ceramic tradition, reminiscent of the Ecuadorian Colombian tradition, or of decorative techniques and cultural elements that could refer to these regions, such as, for example, the rapa corporal, the cultivation of cassava. This southern cultural current would have formed the substratum on which the Olmec village culture would flourish, okay? This southern cultural current, people coming from South America, formed the substratum of the Olmec village culture. The villages of the period have in fact many common characteristics that can be seen especially in ceramics, both in the shapes, types, and decorations of the pottery, and in the typology of the figurines, as can be seen in the villages distributed in the central highlands, in Guerrero, in Oaxaca, in the coastal regions of Chiapas, and Guatemala facing the Pacific, and on the Gulf Coast. This suggests the existence of a broad common horizon that includes not only analogies in the art of the neighborhood, but also in the choice of methods of subsistence and the technologies used for the production of utensils, and whose style recalls featured southern features just like the ones in South America. How, on this substratum, did the Olmec culture become national? This question, which has not yet been resolved, right? We just came back from that other book, right? Which they just told us it's a mystery. They don't know the origin. Where did they come from? Everybody's trying to guess, where did the Olmec come from? Well, the archaeology is given a hint. So again, this question, which has not been resolved, can be answered by hypothesizing that this occurred when one or more totemic groups of the Jaguar managed to assert their totem above that of other groups, to the point of being able to propose it to the cult. They're calling it a cult, for example, by recording it in its entirety or summarizing it in some of its attributes about ceramics. Thus begins first a variant in the preceding style, and then a true artistic style characterized by the representations of Jaguar elements and the portrait of people with deformed heads, a rectangular deformation, cleft and somewhat oblique eyes, mouths with the corners downwards, like those of newborn babies, and shaved heads in whole or in part. In other words, it can be said that the pre-Olmec culture, to which the cultural substratum that characterizes the beginning of the so-called formative period would correspond, gradually enters the Olmec. These pre-Olmec and Olmec chose for their settlements the coastal plains and estuaries, where rivers and water abounded, that is, those ecosystems strongly linked to marine and forest use, all right, where they can have agriculture possibly and settle down, as well as to coastal and river navigation. Over time, they also reached the valleys and other ecological zones. In other words, the territory occupied by the pre-Olmecs was very extensive. It included along the Atlantic coast a vast area located between the Panuco, northern Veracruz, and Grijalva, southern Tabasco, rivers, and along the Pacific slope, an even larger area that goes into Chiapas and Mexico. During the integration period, 1300 to 900 BC, the Olmec culture was fully affirmed and integrated with the autochthonous culture. Again, the Olmec culture was fully affirmed and integrated with the autochthonous culture. These southern people, right, from South America, like I was just saying, right? What happened? They got fully integrated with what? The autochthonous culture, that the local people that were there, whoever they were. Remember, there's a lot of people in Anahuac that have their legends that they came out of mountains or underground or something. Did a cataclysm happen? And that's why these cultures are re-meeting again. And this Olmec culture is forming to the point of accentuating the two great cultural poles that had been delineated in the previous stage. That is, that of the Oaxaca, Guerrero, Central Highlands area, and that of the Gulf Coast. During this cultural phase, the first area enjoyed its seafaring, development, and was the scene of important cultural events, the testimony of which are the elaborate and fanciful local clay productions and the intense activity of exchanges, whether of raw materials or finished objects, inside and outside the area itself, and with the other cultural pole. So this figure down here, it says possible evolution of the clay figurines from La Venta, Tabasco. The La Venta style is characterized by the pastilla technique, which consists of small applications of clay and generally involves female faces. The Olmec style of La Venta is normally characterized by male faces, with the corners of the lips turned down. De Pina Chan, 1982. All right, so here's some of their figurines, again, found. Again, they're letting you know this resembles a lot of the figurines that are much older coming out of Ecuador, Colombia, South America, Peru. All right. So you guys can see the so-called evolution. All right. Where you see a lot of these faces, right? To better understand how the so-called Olmec village culture was delineated, let's look at some settlements referring to this phase of cultural development. Along the Pacific coast of Chiapas and Guatemala, some places such as Altamira present sporadic characteristics of Olmec stamp that successfully will become more evident throughout the coast of Soconusco, isthmus of Tehuantepec, Suchiate River, and the interior region of Chiapas, on the border with Veracruz, the Olmec center of San Isidro, 1350 BC to 400 BC, began to develop. In the area of Veracruz, Tabasco, which saw the flourishing of the theocratic Olmec culture, the first settlements of Olmec groups appeared in Tres Zapotes, Potrero Nuevo, San Lorenzo, between the years 1350 and 900 BC. The Olmec influence in Oaxaca and Guerrero is also attested by the discoveries made, respectively, in San Jose, Mogote, and in Amuco, Abelino, which are the testimony of ancient relations between these areas and the Gulf Coast. From about 1200 BC, the Olmec presence became evident in many villages in Mexico. In Tlatilco, these settlements, however, did not develop further in the successive period of the theocratic Olmecs, although they continued to maintain commercial relations with the Gulf Coast. It says here resources, technology, economy. Within the vast territory encompassed by the Olmec settlements, there were a variety of ecological regions whose natural resources were partly exploited by their occupiers. Thus, taking only one locality as an example, Tlatilco, state of Mexico, we see that the technological inventory of this settlement is so complete that it is a model of the centers of that time. The people of Tlatilco took advantage of nature for all that it had to offer. Trees, plants, and animals provided fruits, roots, tubers, grains, and meats for the food, as well as raw materials such as plant fibers, hides, firewood, and coal. The latter used as fuel. Rivers and lagoons provided drinking water and other varieties of food. wood, animal bones, together deer antlers, and stones, local or imported, were used in the making of utensils and in the production of everyday objects. In the ceramics industry, on the other hand, clay, kaolin, and natural dyes were used. It is important to underline that some of the raw materials arrived in Tlatilco from nearby towns and also from more distant regions through exchanges. In the case of utensils and products, there is a predominance of utensils and products, followed by those made of bones and antlers, and to a lesser extent those of wood, shell, and other materials. In other words, in Tlatilco, you can see above all the development of the lithic and bone industry, all right? The development of these things being used by humans, guys, come on. Although wooden shells were worked and skins were treated, in addition, baskets and mats were braided. It was woven using the fibers of the agave and tule, and perhaps also cotton, as the representations of the garments of the clay figurines of the time. Pottery production included pottery, whether for domestic or funerary use, the modeling of effigies, rattles, whistles, seals, and other objects. Obsidian sculpture was also practiced and personal ornaments were made. The latter include pendants and beads for necklaces, earrings, and plates for pectorals, obtained from animal bones and feline tusks, or worked in alabaster, seashells, turquoise, rock, crystal, and jade. Some hematite mirrors and greenish stone objects in the form of jokes and stirrups have also been discovered. The economy of the inhabitants of Tlatilco, which was no different from any other contemporary village, was therefore based on crops, hunting, fishing, gathering, completed with some exchanges of products and raw materials. The gradual formation of the alluvial terrace of the Ondo River allowed the Tlatilquenses to practice, at first, humidity or flood agriculture, as happened in places located along the large rivers in the lower parts that are flooded in the season of rains. Subsequently, the clearing of cornfield system was used, clearing parts of the neighborhood slats that were covered with forest. To work the fields they had, planting the cane or stick with the tip hardened by fire, serpentine axes, and perhaps wooden hoes in the form of elongated blades. The product of the harvest was stored in granaries dug into the ground outside or under the floor of the huts. Several plants were known for food use, such as corn, beans, chili, prickly pear, and various types of pumpkins. In addition, cotton, firewood, cactus, and agave, leaves, honey, wild fruits, and other natural products were collected. All right, cotton, right? See how long we've been using cotton? The populations of the southern coastal regions, Chiapas, Guatemala, probably consumed cassava, sweet potato, jicama, and palm, while in the rest of the Mesoamerican territory, they also used cassava, avocado, amaranth, chenopodium, the sapotilla, and perhaps also the tomato. Hunting was practiced in the forest surrounding the town and along the shore of the nearby lake, for which there was a propeller or atlalt, arrows with wooden tips or obtained from a prismatic obsidian plate, and traps. Rivers and lagoons represented another important source of food, but it is not possible to know for sure whether fishing was done with nets, baskets, or pots, or in dams with the help of particular herbs that could stun the fish. The presence in the Tlatilco excavations of jaws of felines, dogs, and rodents like the gopher, from deer tibias and antlers, from bird bones, as well as spines and vertebrae from fish and turtle carapaces, indicates that these animals were hunted for food purposes. In addition, the realistic, zoomorphic representations of the vessels further illustrate us regarding the fauna of the time and the possible animals that served as food. In coastal settlements, fishing activity is confirmed by the discovery of net weights, remains of canoes, vertebrae, and fish bones. Marine collection was also carried out, especially shellfish, which could be combined with land collection a little inland. During the archaeological works carried out in Tlatilco, Several objects made with materials that are not found in the surroundings of this settlement and that refer us to different places or areas of origin from where they arrived in the Valley of Mexico. Thanks to commercial exchanges, it is likely that cotton and kaolin came to Tlatilco from the hotlands of Morelos, while green stones, quartz, serpentine, jadeite came from Guerrero. Some raw materials such as rock crystal and alabaster perhaps came from the highlands of Puebla, while seashells, rubber, and fossil chapote came from the Gulf Coast regions, with localities closer to the settlement of Tlatilco, that is, located in the Valley of Mexico. Hematite and cinnabar powder, tepexpan, and obsidian, Teotihuacan, were exchanged. It is clear, therefore, that there were internal relations in the Oaxaca Guerrero Central Antiplano axis and external relations between this area and the Gulf Coast. All right, so real quick, just want you guys to check out the image on the left here, and you guys can see these are some figurines. It says two hollow figures, white kaolin, baby type face. The first measures 22 centimeters. Both come from Tlatilco, Valley of Mexico. All right, so those are depictions, and again, this is same Olmec sites where they're finding these, what looks to be an oriental look. Some say it could be just people with their eyes closed. They're saying it's the baby face cult. In conclusion, it can be stated that in the time of the Olmec, villagers, a mixed economy prevailed based on agriculture, hunting, fishing, and gathering, integrated by the trade of products and materials. This type of economy allowed the existence of agricultural communities formed by family groups, united by kingship, which probably constituted units, homogeneous ethnic and linguistic groups. We can further assume that the earth was property of the entire community, which cultivated it in common, and that what was produced was divided equally among the population of the village. All right, you guys hear that? There probably already existed a division of labor by sex and age, and also a certain social differentiation based on prestige. The artifacts and utensils were, however, considered personal property, and this seems confirmed by the offerings of individual goods placed in the tombs with the deceased. It is possible to observe some social aspects of the Olmec villagers in their clay figurines, which show a remarkable sculptural sense and reveal a perfect anatomical balance and a realism that was unusual for those times. These figures were modeled in very fine clay, sometimes in kaolin, white, cream, or ivory, very well polished. They generally represent short, obese men with deformed and shaved heads, with slightly oblique eyes, as if they had epicanthal folds. The triangular nose is short and wide, while the toothless mouth with thick lips and the corners contracted downwards give these beings the appearance of men children. Women, in addition to the main facial characteristics already stated, are distinguished by wearing braids and headdresses on their heads, or by being partially shaved and with short braids behind the nape of the neck. In addition to these solid figurines, the Olmecs, they modeled larger hollow figures known as baby faces. Also white or ivory in color, they represent seated beings similar to newborns, with the typical Olmec mouth with downward corners. In the figures of Tlatilco, some cultural elements of the society that produced them are observed, that is, the use of facial and body painting, made using seals or clay graffiti, and generally of a geometric type. The deformation of the erect tabular skull, the mutilation of the teeth, and scarification, that is to say, a kind of relief tattoo drawn by the scars of many small wounds together, made to that effect. Dyes were also used to dye hair. All these practices partly reveal the aesthetic ideal of the Olmecs, but it can be assumed that they also served as distinctive characteristics of social groups or were used in the course of ceremonies or particular festivities. The statuettes also show the fantasy and richness of the clothing of the inhabitants of Tlatilco. Cloth trusses were worn rolled around the waist and with one end passed between the legs, skirts, short capes, shirts, and shorts decorated with tassels, perhaps made of cotton. The head of the figurines is decorated with hats, turbans, scarves, tied under the chin, while the face may be hidden under masks and facial bandages. Earmuffs of various metals, bead necklaces, small hematite, mirrors, and other ornaments completed the personal headdress. Trying to interpret the various characters represented in the figurines, we can imagine that in the society of those times there were shamans and doctors, witches dressed in a colorful way. These were dressed in wigs, masks, and types of caps or ruffs. They wore false beards, rattles, bunches of leaves or grass, and other objects of ritual use, such as small hematite mirrors, all combined to make an impression on the population during their quack practices and in agricultural or linked ceremonies to the rituals of hunting and puberty. The ball players are represented with a covered hand to hit the ball that was made of solid rubber, and they wear a protective knee pad. Many statuettes represent musicians while they play small drums, dancers wearing skirts, and acrobats with their bodies arched and one foot on their heads. In the burials, clay whistles in the shape of dogs and birds, clay flutes, resonators made from deer shoulders blades, and rattles in the shape of hollow clay balls with pebbles or fired clay balls inside have been found. All this indicates the existence of festivities accompanied by music, dance, ball games, and other entertainment, all right? This is all happening in ancient times, okay? All this stuff, this is high civilization, including ball games, okay? And other entertainment presided over by the local shamans. Representations of dwarfs, hunchbacks, deformed or pathological beings are also frequent. There is no shortage of effigies of young naked women with body pains or facial expressions, of pregnant women and mothers carrying their children, the backs or the waist, as well as the children tied in their portable cribs, and sometimes with the head deforming device. In Tlatilco, as in other villages, the population was perhaps divided into patrilineal clans and totemic clans, which are a form of social organization. Probably, the witches or shamans partly controlled the communities since they were the intermediaries between individuals and the ancestors, the spirits of things or supernatural beings, and were in addition the repositories of the knowledge of the time. All right, so before we continue, just want to go ahead and check out this image on the right here, guys. As you guys can see here, figure fragment terracotta, in which evidence of dental mutilation, Tlatilco Valley of Mexico. Again, many different looks, many different phenotypes. There may also have been councils of elders or prestigious people who decided on the collective actions of the community. The rest of the population was involved in food production and other economic activities. The constant presence of shamans and clay art lead us to think that magical ideas regulated the lives of agricultural villages and that magic constituted the ideology of society. The Olmecs were concerned with explaining the mysteries of birth and fertility, developing, at the same time, an original, artistic style based on the symbolism of the jaguar, as seen in most of his known works. For the Olmecs, in fact, the jaguar was the main totem animal associated with the earth, all right? Jaguar meant earth, and perhaps considered the protector of newborns and children who, when they became adults, would have ensured the survival of the group. Perhaps this is why they modeled the figures known as baby faces. All right, they're saying perhaps, they don't really know. It can be assumed, therefore, that there was a cult of newborns as a product of maternal fertility, linked in a magical way with the earth and the birth of vegetation. In addition to the jaguar, in Tlatilco the snake was represented, which seems to symbolize the water of the rivers. The snake is the water, the jaguar is the earth. You get it? That is a kind of spirit of terrestrial water. As seen in a vessel found in Tlatilco, the body of this snake is undulating and scaly. On its head, it has crests like flames. It has protruding fangs and a forked tongue. In the magical world in which they lived, the Olmecs conceived the jaguar as a symbol of the earth, and a snake as a symbol of the water. From the combination of the two, all right, a supernatural monster would be born, perhaps an expression of the water that fertilizes the earth, generator of vegetation and nutrition, that is, of life itself. All right, so I just want to add here something. I'm thinking about, combining a serpent with a jaguar, and all I can picture is a dragon, like the Chinese dragons, they have four legs. This new form began to be an object of worship. In his honor, perhaps sacrifices were made, perhaps even human, so that the communion of water with the earth was effective. All this is explained if we take into account that at that time, agriculture had a determinant role in the economy of those groups. In fact, there already existed among the Olmec villagers a specific magical religious symbology, fundamentally linked to agriculture, waterland, as an ideographic language. All right, we just got an image, as you guys can see. Looks like what, a dragon? Doesn't that look like a dragon to you? The cult of the dead was quite widespread. In Tlatilco, some cases of human sacrifice have been observed, especially of children whose head, hands, and arms were cut off to be buried separately or next to the body of an important man or woman. Multiple burials of a woman or a man surrounded by other women have also been explored, confirming the custom of human sacrifice when a person of high rank died. Sometimes dogs were sacrificed, perhaps serving as companions for the deceased on his journey to the beyond. Generally, the dead were wrapped in mats or cotton cloth tied with strings and buried in graves dug in the ground, both in a flexed and extended position, fetus and uterus, dorsal, ventral, and lateral recumbency. It was a custom to sprinkle them with cinnabar or red hematite powder, perhaps to give them the appearance of life. Animist ideas regarding death and the continuation of life in the afterlife led to the custom of accompanying the deceased with offerings, more or less rich, consisting of personal objects, ceramics, and food. There were also secondary burials, that is, bones that no longer have an anatomical relationship, either because they were deposited in one place and after a certain time they were removed and buried in another, or because there was a custom of exposing the corpse to the elements and then burying it. This suggests a repetition of complex funerary rituals even long after death and the first burial. The most significant artistic production of the Olmec villagers was undoubtedly the ceramics, which was developed mainly in the regions of Oaxaca, Guerrero, and Valley of Mexico. Olmec artisans excelled in the modeling of figurines, masks, musical instruments, and pottery, among which those for funerary use stand out. They also made small objects with the clay, such as the seals and personal ornaments. As we have already said, Olmec ceramics arise from the Ecuadorian Colombian tradition. All right, again, the Olmec ceramic arise, remember, we just got this from South America, the influence, right, from the Ecuadorian Colombian tradition, from which acquires various decorative techniques and shapes. But the Olmecs added to their ceramics the symbolism of the jaguar, creating a particular and differentiated style. According to regions in which it developed, this style acquired its own modalities, but it is distinguished everywhere by its monochrome ceramics, black, white, gray, ivory, or with white borders and spots, by its feline designs, by its flat bases, and by some traditional forms such as the stirrup, handle bottle. The motifs that decorate the ceramics constitute a kind of ideographic language of the Olmec groups. It is a symbology related to the representation of the jaguar that can be considered the beginning of a writing. Among the most frequent symbols are the claw, the face, the eyebrows, and spot on the jaguar skin, all right? They're saying this might be an early form of writing using the jaguar. So we have some more ceramics, all right, and a mask, as you guys can see. I'm gonna go through some images here. All right, some of these drawings. All right, they're replicating what they're finding here. Look at the designs. All right, here goes the so-called eggs. This is what they're saying might be a probable early form of writing, and it is. And here you go, some more right here. Okay, early form of writing, ancient Olmec, so-called Olmec. All right, look at this one. This is the dragon, the serpent jaguar, huh? Pretty cool designs. All right, so you guys can see again, this is all Olmec. All the next following images, guys, is all Olmec. All right, you see the different phenotypes being represented here. This one here is at La Venta, Tabasco. All right, you see that? Pretty cool. All right, and then we got these down here. Another one right here. Again, all these are Olmec. These are all found in the same places where they got the stone heads from the same period. Okay, as you guys can see. This was very interesting, early yoga pose. All right, we're going to talk about a lot about that in this series. Probably in another video. We're going to go over the influence of the Olmec in Asia. All right, another figurine here. You guys can see. Like, remember, all they have on the Olmec is the art. This is what they've been basically basing their whole history off all these little figurines and artifacts, stone sculptures, pottery, terracotta, ceramics that they're finding. Check this one out again, another yoga pose. You see that? Just like in Hindustan. Got another image right here. We're gonna zoom into another one right here. Okay. Again, all this is Olmec. This one is of a fish. See that? Nice and polished. Very advanced polishing. This one right here is a duck. As you guys can see, I think we read about this duck already. So they mentioned this duck while we were reading a lot. And here it is. Here we have a turtle figurine. Not sure if this is a vase to collect water or what it is, or a pipe, but here it is. Pretty cool, right? This is an Olmec mask. You see that? Different phenotypes, right? And look at this guy down here. He has like a whole different phenotype in the mask, right? Both of them Olmec, both from the same place. Same place. All right? That's what I'm saying. It's not just the stone colossal heads. You got to be able to explain these masks, these other phenotypes. All right, so take a good look. And you see this one down here. All different phenotype, as you guys can see. Another image right here. Little statue figurine. Got his legs and arms crossed. What appears to be like a mohawk. Another figurine here. You guys can see. With the slanted eyes. Another figurine here, which is probably one of those they're saying the baby face types. And right under this we got this one right here. Pretty interesting. You know, this is very early art, very early sculpture. This is very ancient. All right, let's see what's right under him. Let me just zoom into that. Look at that. Again, all this is Olmec. Here's a drawing of one of the figurines. Here's a mask they found as well. And here's another mask. This one's very interesting. They're trying to figure out what it is. To me, honestly, it looks like the white-faced monkey that we have in Costa Rica. That's like kind of like their face. I know a lot of people will be like, oh, that's an alien, that's a reptilian. But honestly, it looks like the white-faced monkey. And some more sketches. All right, you guys can see. So what they're saying is that all that is in this figurine. There's little inscriptions on this figurine is what they're letting you know. right, we return to the book, The Mystery of the Olmecs by David Hatcher Childress. I'm going to pick up where we left off. It says here, are the Olmecs transoceanic colonizers? Now, applying what we just learned about the art and how it seems there was a lot of influence coming from South America, then yes, definitely could have been transoceanic colonizers. Now, I just want to say they're only saying this based on their out of Africa, out of Mesopotamia theories. But also, we just learned, right, that a lot of the influence seems to have been coming from South America. So, yeah, these people had ships, and we know there was a major navigational hub here in this area of Central America. Check out my videos on the ancient navigators of America, a couple of videos I got on that. But let's read what they have to say. We're going to dodge the hijack when we see it, okay? It is not known what name the ancient Olmec used for themselves. Again, we broke that down. That's not their name. That's a name given to them from an invading barbaric tribe that arrived in that area in 1150 AD. So we shouldn't be calling them that. Some later Mesoamerican accounts seem to refer to the ancient Olmec as Tamuanchang. We're going to look into that. The classic period for the Olmecs is generally considered to be from 1200 BC, ending around 400 BC. Early formative Olmec artifacts are said to go back to 1500 BC, and probably earlier. No one knows where the Olmec came from, but the two predominant theories are they were Native Americans, meaning they were local or aboriginal indigenous to this land. They arrived from the same Siberian stock as most other Native Americans. We already know that's a hijack. That's the hijack big time with their Bering Strait theories. And just happened to accentuate the Negroid genetic material that was latent in their genes. So Siberians that turn Negroid, you see how they're trying to explain what they're seeing is so silly. They're like reaching so far and trying to explain things. The worst thing about it is they're using their hijacks as the base. Number two, they were outsiders who immigrated to the Olmen area via boat, most likely as sailors or passengers on transoceanic voyages that went on for probably hundreds of years. All right, so again, these are their theories. They're trying to say, are any of these possible? And again, Dodge the hijack, America's a true old world. They're always seen in reverse. At the center of the debate about the origin of the Olmecs is the classic struggle between isolationists who think that ancient man was incapable of transoceanic voyages. All right, so dodge the hijack, they definitely were, and we don't dispute that. The base was here though, and therefore nearly every ancient culture developed on its own. And diffusionists who think that ancient man could span the oceans, which explains similarities in widely disparate cultures. So the thing about diffusionists is they always say that America was uninhabited, and all these old world similarities of artifacts, languages that they're finding here is because people came here and it wasn't indigenous. They never want to say, possibly, could it have been people from here? Could this be the true old world? They never really try to pursue that. There are a few proponents of diffusionism at the traditional academic level. Ivan Van Sertima, okay, dodge the hijack with his Pan-African way of looking at everything, and all he has as proof is looks, the physical phenotype of the colossal heads. That's why he's calling them Africans. Other than that, he has no proof that they're from Africa. Read the whole book, go verify. So Ivan Van Sertima of Rutgers University, New Jersey, actively promotes the diffusionist theory that ancient man crossed both the Atlantic and the Pacific in prolonged transoceanic contact. Yes, but again, they were seeing it in reverse this whole time. His books, African Presence in Early America, that's the hijack, and African Presence in Early Asia, again, Afrocentric. People say, well, he did what he did at his time and it helped us. Well, maybe not. Maybe he was a gatekeeper the whole time and he knew who you really were. Both possibilities are on the table. So those two books are filled with articles and photos that show without a doubt that Negroes have lived literally all over the world, including the ancient Americas, and we agree with that. The only thing is, they didn't all come out of Africa, and that's their whole generalization, pseudo-Darwinism out of Africa theories. While Ben Sertima does not bring in such unorthodox theories as Atlantis or a lost continent in the Pacific, he is clearly of the belief, belief that Negroes in ancient times developed many advanced civilizations and lived all over the globe. Alright? Again, but he was calling them Africans. So he's literally giving the credit to Africa when he's saying Negroes. But yes, melanated people all over the world, and yes, many of these old world nations were melanated. We've shown the sources. Unfortunately, most of the writers in the academic field prefer to champion the isolationist theories to the virtual exclusion of the diffusionists. In the recent scholarly book of Richard A. Deal, The Olmecs, America's First Civilization, Deal has only one paragraph on the subject saying, "The origins of Olmec culture have intrigued scholars and lay people alike since Tres Zapote's colossal head 1, a gigantic stone human head with vaguely Negroid features, was discovered in Veracruz 140 years ago. Since that time, Olmec culture and art have been attributed to seafaring Africans, Egyptians, Nubians, Phoenicians, Atlanteans, Japanese, Chinese, and other ancient wanderers." And again, do you guys see the pattern? It's always some outer, some foreign influence, never local. They never want to just say, maybe this is the true old world. Maybe these old world nations were here. As often happens, the truth is infinitely more logical, if less romantic. The Olmecs were Native Americans who created a unique culture in southeastern Mexico, Isthmus of Tehuantepec, alright? The most logical thing, like I just said. They're always trying to say, well, it was Africans who came. Well, it was Egyptians. No, it was the Sumerians. No, it was the Irish. No, it was the Phoenicians. No. But the most logical thing, once you see all the research, look at everything we're finding here. It's more older. It's more archaic. The more logical and less romantic is that the Olmecs were an indigenous American people who created a unique culture in southeastern Mexico's Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Archaeologists now trace Olmec origins back to pre-Olmec cultures in the region, and there is no credible evidence for major intrusions from the outside. Where's the proof that they came from Africa? Just because they look Negroid? We had all those phenotypes here in ancient America. You gotta drop your whole Pan-African biases. I know a lot of you watching me, you're still Pan-Africanizing everything, because I still see it in the comments, even in the last Olmec video. You're obviously new to the channel, and you're not ready to really let go of old, outdated doctrines and empty your cup and learn new things. Furthermore, not a single bona fide artifact of Old World origin has ever appeared in the Olmec archaeological site, or for that matter, anywhere else in Mesoamerica. Now, it depends what they say in Old World, right? But we found many what appears to be Old World writings and artifacts, right? Egyptian statuettes, so-called Egyptian. But that was all local stuff. With this paragraph, Deal summarily dismisses all theories and evidence of transoceanic contact. We don't really know what a bona fide artifact would be, since Old World and New World articles were often identical, like I just said, and we shall see. Also, we are given no further information on the pre-Olmec cultures that the Olmecs are presumably derived from. But the Olmecs, to actually be Africans, not just look like them, they would almost certainly have come to the Isthmus of Tehuantepec via ship. But since such voyages are dismissed immediately, and there will be no further discussion of it, the Olmecs simply have to be local boys who have always pretty much been there. At some time in remote prehistory, their early genetic group walked into this Olmec heartland area. All right. So I think that this author, based on what I've read from this book, is that he's a diffusionist, and I think he definitely thinks these are Africans that came here. Because if it's Negroid, everybody thinks that people that look Negroid came out of Africa. So he's going with that whole thing. According to Deal, the Olmecs would have been an isolated group within their region as well, with little contact with other tribes in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, says Deal. We do not know what these people call themselves. All right, we don't know these people, so why are you making up things? Or if they even had a term that encompassed all the inhabitants of Altman, were they like a united empire, there is no evidence that they formed a single unified ethnic group, and almost certainly no Olmec considered people living more than a few hours' walk away as members of his or her own group. Nevertheless, the numerous independent local cultures were so similar to one another that modern scientists consider them a single generic culture. Okay? Again, all of it is based on the art they have found only. This strong statement bears repeating. Almost certainly, no Olmec considered people living more than a few hours' walk away as members of his or her own group. If the Olmecs were isolated from neighbors only a few hours' walk away, they certainly wouldn't have had contact with people across an ocean, would they? As we progress with this book, we will examine just how accurate a statement this is, one that is largely accepted in many universities today, but would almost certainly seem to be wrong. All right, so again, he's going to try to prove they came from somewhere else. Remember, we just coming from the other book based on the archaeology, what they told us in the last book, right? Real archaeologist, not a writer. This is a writer. The archaeologist wrote the other book I translated. He's saying, based on the archaeology, there's some influence coming from South America. Now, where they came from, they're saying a whole other thing, and you can't conjecture. Follow the archaeology, show me the sources, show me the proof. The Olmec settlements, according to Deal, rose up independently in their corner of Mesoamerica, without the influence of any other culture. They all suddenly began making monumental statues out of basalt, one of the hardest and most difficult stones to carve. They made large structures with sophisticated drainage systems, but they weren't really in contact with their early neighbors. The spread of Olmec-like artifacts was achieved only later when Olmec styles were used by other more widespread cultures. Deal was actually proved wrong on this account when it was announced in January 2007 that an Olmec-influenced city had been found near Cuernavaca, hundreds of miles from Olmec's Gulf Coast territory at Sazacatla. Announcements at that time stated that a 2,500-year-old city influenced by the Olmecs, often referred to as the mother culture of Mesoamerica, has been discovered hundreds of miles away from the Olmec's Gulf Coast territory. Archaeologists said in National Geographic News, January 26, 2007. More on this in the last chapter of this book, but archaeologists have now concluded that Olmecs inhabited a very large area of southern Mexico, much greater than had ever been imagined. This discovery is not really surprising since the Olmec city of Chalcatzinco near Mexico City was excavated and written about in 1970s. So the preponderance of the evidence shows that the Olmecs were very aware of the villages near to them and aware of cities and peoples quite far from them. Of course, trade existed. It was necessary. Were they aware of transoceanic civilizations as well? Yes, they were. They probably were doing it. We're going to get into all that. Deal's book, already outdated, though published in 2004, is an interesting but fairly dry read. Not only does he refuse to discuss Negroid features and transoceanic contact in his book, but except for one brief mention below, there is no discussion of cranial deformation at all, which is one of the more curious habits of the Olmecs and the Maya, and is found among many other cultures worldwide. Okay, still, that doesn't prove it came from somewhere else. What if it originated here and when? Again, all these people always trying to see it in reverse. The Olmecs had many unusual similarities with the Maya and other transoceanic cultures, such as the reverence for jade and exotic feathers, the use of hallucinogenic mushrooms and other psychedelic drugs. This is the true old world. And the use of hieroglyphics on stone stele as markers. All right? Again, this is the true old world, of course. We influence the whole world. Says Deal of the artifacts found at the Olmec burial at Tlatilco. One high-status woman was laid to rest with 15 pots, 20 clay figurines, 2 pieces of red-painted bright green jadeite that may have formed part of a bracelet, a crystalline hematite plaque, a bone fragment with traces of alfresco paint, and miscellaneous stones. Another burial held the remains of a male whose skull had been deliberately modified in infancy and whose teeth were trimmed into geometric patterns as an adult. He may have been a shaman, since all the objects placed with him were likely part of a shaman's power bundle. They included small metates for grinding hallucinogenic mushrooms, clay effigies of mushrooms, quartz, graphite, pitch, and other exotic materials, that could have been used in current rituals. A magnificent ceramic bottle placed in his grave depicted a contortionist or acrobat who rests on his stomach, with his hands supporting his chin while his legs bent completely around so that his feet touch the top of his head. Could this masterpiece be an effigy of the actual occupant of the grave? Indeed, Dale almost gets excited about the Olmecs. Could they actually be psychedelic Jaguar shamans who like to make monumental heads to keep themselves busy? The Olmecs, by any standard, are a fantastic, amazing, confusing, psychedelic, and in some cases, just plain weird people. Dodge the hijack. They don't know anything about them. They only got the art, remember. We do not know where they came from, like I just said. We don't know why they were there. Like I just said, they don't know anything. We don't know what their mission was. In short, we know very little about them, guys. You hear? So anything they're going to say about, oh, they had to have been Africans, they have to have traveled from somewhere else, they have to have been Egyptians, they're making it up because they're admitting right here, like in any other book, they don't know anything about them. All we really know is that they are old and they are strange, all right? But based on what we just read on the other book, right, they do know, based on the archaeology, that the art resembles the Ecuadorian Colombian people, which is much older. While it is easy to see them as proto Mayans and citizens of Olman, however large that country might have been, we should also consider them as the fantastic proto Mesoamericans they may have been, psychedelic aliens who used lasers to cut colossal balsa heads, Atlantean refugees who made a last stand in Tabasco, or Shang Chinese mercenaries, huh? The Western Chia, taken from East Africa or Melanesia, and specially trained to administer the Pacific and later Atlantic ports of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, or perhaps a people originally from the Atlantic side all along. Having come from Africa? No, dodge the hijack. You just admitted you don't know anything about them, so stop making things up. Possibly as a military force from Egypt? Nope. Whereas Africa circa 1500 BC? Nope. Stop making that up. There are many possibilities. Again, these are all opinions. So, with an open mind, let us look into the mysteries of the Olmec, their fantastic art, their sophisticated technology, their unusual number system, writing system, and other customs. What we find may surprise us. We are likely to find that the Olmecs were geniuses, but many other cultures had surprisingly similar ideas. Alright, so we're back in this book. It's from the Reader's Digest. It's called Mysteries of the Ancient Americas, the New World before Columbus, before Salvador Fernandez Sarco, the Portuguese Jew. So before we start reading, just want to show these images from the book where we left off last time. Take a look at these stone works here of the ancient so-called Olmec. It says here, known as the Little Grandmother. A buck-toothed kneeling stone figure from La Venta above holds a rectangular vessel. The monkey at left, also from La Venta, was uncovered in 1956 but without a face, which has since been fancifully reconstructed. Alright, and now we move down, and these are some other figurines, as you guys can see. I think we saw this in black and white. Alright, and it says here, strong expressive realism pervades Olmec art. The sculptor of the famous basalt statue, the wrestler, at left translated his grasp of the structure of the male body into kinetic form. You see that? The acrobat or dancer above, his body reddened with cinnabar. Okay? A dancer, performer, and we got a wrestler. Again, this is all in ancient America, okay? And he got a beard and a mustache. They said Indians didn't have beards. It says the dancer moves with convincing vitality. And the naked baby of a hollow ceramic at top left, a favorite Olmec theme, is portrayed in a pose characteristic of infancy. Much has been made of the grotesque in Olmec art. Olmec sculptors were attracted to pathological human figures as subject matter. It is as though the artist felt an obsessive fascination with deformities. Dwarfs, hunchbacks, sufferers from Down syndrome, and the overweight were all depicted with great artistry and care in stone and clay. Did the Olmec look with wonder at a fellow human being born with a deformity? In their eyes, it was a manifestation of the will of the gods and conferred a magic and sacredness upon the ill-formed and mishappen. All right? Again, this is their interpretation of what they're finding. So, we got to be ready to dodge the hijack. Again, this is all they have is the art, nothing else. And the families of even those Olmec born without deformities deliberately reshaped their newborn babies' heads by trying a board in an oblique position against the forehead. This custom, also practiced by the Maya, may have been a mark of the elite to set them apart from the peasantry, and examples of it are pervasive in Olmec art. Above all else, these ancient people prized jade. From jade, ranging from a beautiful translucent bluish color to blue, grays, and dark greens. Olmec artists carved thousands upon thousands of exquisite figures and ornaments, most of them offering to the gods. Again, this is their interpretations. The Olmec, writes the Mexican archaeologist Ignacio Bernal, were not only the first and the finest sculptors of Mexico, they were also the first to work jade, and indubitably were the greatest, the first. Of the several different minerals known by the generic name jade, jadeite is the most valuable, but the Olmec also cherished other translucent stones such as quartz and amethyst. Carving the delicate figurines with the tools available must have been a long and tedious process. First, the natural block was examined and scraped to assess its quality. In order to shape the stone, unwanted parts had to be removed by tapping and sawing, using thin slabs of stone or clay fragments as tools. The main contours of a figure were then delineated by means of bores. As a last step, the artist rubbed and polished his creation to achieve the deep brilliance that has made Olmec jade such highly esteemed work of art. The number of jade pieces produced by La Venta artists is staggering. In 1941, Matthew Sterling came upon a cache of jade offerings that required a half hour to take out, 782 specimens in all, and another cache offering at a small site on the Rio Pesquero, a tributary of the Tonala, yielded up dozens of life-size jade masks and thousands of ceremonial axes of jade and serpentine, many of them since vanished. Why did the Olmec bury such large quantities of their highly valued jade? Their donations may have carried with them the same kind of social prestige that a rich man today garners by donating a new museum wing. Or again, the worth of jade may have been increased by taking it out of circulation. The acquisition of jade carried the Olmec far beyond the boundaries of their country, for nowhere within the confines of the Olmec heartland was any jade to be found. The demand for jade and also for other hard stones drove the Olmec into southwest of Mexico, and perhaps as far to the south as modern-day El Salvador. Now remember, a lot of these people were coming up already from South America, so they already knew the jade was there. And El Salvador says here nearly 500 air miles from the heartland. Olmec trade routes snaked across Mesoamerica, following along river beds and cutting through mountains passes. Michael Coe has named this far-flung network the Jade Route. Alright, the Jade Route. Have you ever heard of the Jade Route? Along it, in the volcanic Mexican highlands and following the Pacific coast, the imprint of Olmec civilization is still visible. In rock carvings and in cave paintings, at burial sites and on sculpted monuments, the intervening millennia have not obliterated traces of the Olmec presence. It says here the highly polished jade figure at far left may have been deliberately damaged during a ritual mutilation rite of the Olmec. The articulated crustacean at top left, only 2 inches long, was carved from a single piece of jade, testimony to the skill of its creator. The part Jaguar, part man jade figure at bottom left represents the rain god. It came to light in 1909 during the building of a dam and was one of the earliest clues that led to the discovery of the Olmec civilization, When they were building a dam, so they buried something in Mexico too under a dam, just like in the United States. You already know about these dams, right? All right, here we see a little weird jaguar. Okay, jade piece on the left. It says here, among the most striking works are the rock paintings at Ostotitlan near Chilpancingo, which lies a few hours' drive to the southeast of Mexico City and almost 200 miles due west of the Olmec heartland. There, at the mouth of 2 grottos and weathered by centuries of exposure, Olmec paintings dated from 900 to 700 BC are still discernible. One measuring 12.5 feet wide and a little over 8 feet high can be seen more than 10 feet above the bottom of the cliff. How the artist reached the height is one of the puzzling questions about the rock painting, using predominantly red with touches of ochre and bluish green. The painter depicted a human figure dressed in a bird costume just like they found in the mounds, right? Birdman. And seated upon a throne decorated with the head of a dragon. The head of a dragon is a dragon man. It's not no bird, it's the dragon man, That sounds like Quetzalcoatl. An owl, a standing man with a jaguar, a serpent monster with protruding tongue are all elements of these paintings, whose meaning has yet to be definitely interpreted, okay? Not far from the paintings of the Ostotitlan cave are others buried more than 3/4 of a mile inside a cave near Yuxtlahuaca. These were not identified stylistically as Olmec paintings until 1966. Once again, they portray a person of importance clothed in red and serpent with green feathers. Was this an Olmec shrine? So a serpent with feathers, A serpent with feathers. If one could only conjure up the scene of its dedication, a great procession of Olmec royalty, writes Cole, lit by the flare of pine torches and probably accompanied by chanting and drumming. Wherever the Olmec went in Mesoamerica, they brought their civilizing influence with them. In the highlands of the Valley of Mexico, they transformed a village world which produced simple pottery into a society characterized by sophisticated craftsmanship and imaginative variety in the production of exuberant clay effigy sculpture, hourglass vases, and pots in the forms of shells, fish, birds, armadillos, and strange half-beast, half-man creatures. Clay figurines similar to those found at San Lorenzo show women with tiny waists and wide hips. Those of men have painted faces and bodies, headdresses, and jewelry. The magnificent art of the Olmec, by which today we can trace their march across Mexico, is only the visible sign of the civilization's role in the history of Mesoamerica. What else they bequeathed to the Indian cultures that followed is often intangible, but no less real. Both the Olmec and the classic Maya, 1,000 years later, enshrined and portrayed their rulers as specific individuals of power and authority. The religious symbolism of the Olmec was passed on not only to the Maya but to other later cultures such as Teotihuacan and the Mexica. The macabre rite of bloodletting, in which the worshippers pierced themselves in homage to the gods, was practiced by the Olmec and the Maya alike. Sharp instruments of jade and stingray spines have turned up in both regions. It seems probable that a game just like soccer, was invented by the Olmec of San Lorenzo. It wasn't invented in England. Come on, man, dodge the hijack, dodge your own hijacks. We got the rubber balls here. Again, it seems probable that a game much like soccer was invented by the Olmec of San Lorenzo. We're going to get into that, where were the first ball courts ever in the world. The remains of the earthen ball court and clay figurines of ball players have been found there. There is even evidence of what must surely be the original American football. Okay, there's evidence of the original American football. All right, here, the Olmec. I told you those are helmets, those are ball players to me. Fragments of a possible large rubber ball were dug up in 1967, and when a flame was held to them, they gave off the acrid smell of burning rubber. The root of the calendar and of Maya hieroglyphic writing can also be traced back to the Olmec. In a rudimentary form, they used abstract identifying symbols. A U sign, perhaps signifying the moon, and the king symbol for the sun are common to the Olmec and the Maya. All these first steps were carried further by Olmec influenced cultures on the Pacific coast and transmitted by them to the classic Maya. Some experts believe that a bar and dot numbering system was already in use by the Olmec as early as 400 BC. While this use cannot be confirmed, it is true that Stel C from Tres Zapotes bears the long count date 32 BC, which comes close to the heels of the last remnants of the Olmec influence. Dodge the hijack, remember, that's when they're trying to say they went extinct. Around 900 BC, the Olmec civilization at San Lorenzo came to an abrupt end. In contrast, La Venta, which continued to carry the culture forward for some 300 years, slowly ceased to be a center of power and influence. Code describes La Venta's decline. All construction comes to a halt. No more tombs are built and stocked. No more offerings are made beneath its multicolored floors. Its rulers and people are gone. But there was more. In death as in life, the Olmec did things on a grand scale. Their demise at San Lorenzo was characterized by violence and destruction, bizarre acts that appeared to have come from overwhelming hatred and rage. Monuments were battered and broken into fragments. The heads of anthropomorphic statues were knocked off. Bas relief stones were shattered, some weighing as much as 50 tons. Altars equally massive were cracked, and the multi-ton, colossal heads, too gigantic actually to break, were pitted and grooved. Then everything was buried, often face down. The physical labor and engineering skill that went into this mass destruction and mutilation must have been staggering. Alright, but what if this was a major cataclysm like we read about what happened in 800 AD? Remember, that's when really it seems that people in this area, there was like a mass extinction or a mass migration out of there because of what was going on, a whole reset. But they're saying, hey, somebody purposely hid these heads and buried them. Maybe. When archaeologists first tried to explain such wholesale destruction, they interpreted it as the work of outsiders, conquerors who destroyed Olmec monuments. But in the late 1960s, during Coe's excavation at San Lorenzo, he uncovered unusual evidence. He found that the basalt monument had first been mutilated and then laid out in long lines on ridges around the peripheries of the site. At La Venta, too, it was discovered that the mutilated sculptures had been buried in a pattern of clusters. Why would an invading force go to such trouble? These discoveries opened up the possibility that the Olmec themselves were responsible for the destruction. In the early 1980s, the idea that there was a symbolic meaning to the mutilation of Olmec monuments was put forward, drawing a parallel between Olmec religious beliefs and those of today's Canelos Quichua Indians, who live in the tropical forests of South America. The archaeologist David C. Grove has speculated that the destruction of monuments was carried out by the Olmec themselves at the death of a ruler. The Canelos Quichua, Grove points out, believes that a supernatural power derived from the underworld resides in the possessions of a chief or a priest, his wooden stool, his axe, the hut in which he lives. While a man is alive, he is in command of this dangerous power. But once he dies, there is no one to control it. To guard their society against this threat, the Canelos Quichua destroy and bury the dead man's possessions. Did the Olmecs subscribe to the same belief 2,000 years ago? Alright, remember, there's a lot of South American influence, so maybe. The analogy Grove believes is not far-fetched. It would also explain the curious fact that the greatest destruction was visited upon the altars. If an altar was indeed a throne, and thus the seat of power of a ruler, it would have been the chief repository of his supernatural underworld power, and the most frightening of his possessions. By destroying and burying thrones, supernatural forces were successfully quelled and controlled. Alright, so again, this is all their interpretations. Yet another theory, theories, which has recently been espoused, turns to the early Maya for its corroboration. At Saros and Belize, a center dated from 300 BC to the 1st century AD, excavators found traces of the defacement of monuments. The evidence shows that bonfires were lit at the base of pyramids, that pottery was deliberately hurled at walls and destroyed, and that steles were broken and buried. Archaeologists call these outbreaks termination rituals, and believe they occurred at the death of a ruler or with the rise of a new charismatic leader, somebody taking over, who urges people to erase their past. Could this have been the case at San Lorenzo? Although there is evidence at La Venta that these rites were followed there too, it is at San Lorenzo that intensity of the destruction takes on an apocalyptic character. Like so much else about the ancient Olmec, the true explanation of the destruction may lie forever beyond the horizon of our knowledge. Or maybe they don't want you to know, because you're still here. By the time the Spaniards arrived in Mexico 1519, almost 2 millennia had gone by since the closing centuries of Olmec civilization. Yet succeeding generations of Mesoamerican Indians had, perhaps, not forgotten the ancient ones. An Indian legend recorded by the Spanish priest Bernardino de Sahagún tells of a people of the distant past who lived in a land called Tamuanchan, which has been placed just south of Veracruz. There they devised the count of the years, the Book of Dreams. From these people, the legend runs, sprang the civilization of Teotihuacan in the Valley of Mexico, with its monumental pyramids dedicated to the sun and the moon. But the Olmec may have been more than just a shadowy folk memory to those who came later, for they left behind them a legacy of exquisite works of art. Again, all they have is the art. On a November day in 1978, during the excavation of the Templo Mayor, the great Aztec double pyramid in the heart of modern-day Mexico City, a perfect miniature green stone mass came to light above. The power and simplicity of its style proclaimed it to be Olmec, treasured as an heirloom. By the Aztec, they had deemed it worthy to be part of a ritual offering to their gods. Across the centuries, the mass spoke to the Aztec of their predecessors, recalling the greatness to which they owed so much of their own civilization.